Jasmine Crockett walks into Congress holding one name, one video, and a DNA match that shakes the floor. She doesn't just confront Donald Trump. She tears open the silence wrapped around a missing woman and a forbidden affair, a fake name, a locked apartment, a girl who vanished after one night that was never meant to surface. When truth wears lipstick instead of loyalty, how far will power go to bury it again? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The room felt like a vault. Thick oak doors sealed shut behind the last person who entered, muting even the sound of footsteps. A single screen stood at the far end of the long table, black and blank like a held breath. Around the oval, 11 members of Congress took their seats silent, stiff-backed, each with a nameplate and a bottled water that no one touched. Jasmine Crockett walked in without a word, in a tailored black suit and low heels, carrying only a small object wrapped in a red folder. Her eyes swept the room once, and then she placed the folder flat on the center of the table, its label in black marker. 04:07 a.m., Truth walks in. Across from her, Donald Trump sat flanked by two attorneys, leaning back like a man on vacation, arms crossed, face unreadable, but clearly unbothered. The air was dry, but the tension hung heavy, like smoke without fire. Jasmine didn't wait for formalities. "I request a temporary suspension of today's agenda," she said, voice steady. "I have evidence to present evidence of financial misconduct involving campaign funds and behavior that may constitute criminal concealment." A quiet gasp came from the left side of the table. The chair shifted slightly, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. Trump scoffed, eyes narrowed. "What now?" he sneered. "You bringing TikToks into a congressional hearing?" A few chuckles escaped from his side, but died almost instantly. Jasmine turned to him, calm but cold. "No," she said. "I brought a piece of your past, and the face of someone you thought no one would ever remember." The screen didn't just flicker on it, cut through the air like a courtroom gavel slamming down on decades of silence. Static cleared into sharp grayscale. A high-end hotel corridor, sleek and sterile. In the top right corner, a digital timestamp burned into the screen. October 12, 2016, 04:07 a.m. The hallway stood still for 2 seconds. Then ding, the elevator slid open. The first figure stepped out with calculated ease. A man in a trench coat and baseball cap, head lowered just enough to hide his face but not his identity. The way he moved, the way he filled the frame, no one in the room needed to guess. They knew. His body language carried the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him its silence. Then came the second figure, a woman, tall, composed, dressed in a gray overcoat, with a flash of red beneath just enough of a red dress to catch the camera. Her dark hair cascaded past her shoulders, her face concealed behind large black sunglasses. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stayed close to the man, close in the way no one would confuse with coincidence or formality. Her heel tapped once, then twice. She moved in sync with him, every step rehearsed like it wasn't the first time. The camera caught everything. As they approached the end of the hallway, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a key card. He glanced briefly over his shoulder, then turned to her. His hand slipped around her waist with practiced ease. She tilted her head toward him, welcoming, familiar. He leaned in, and gently, with zero hesitation, kissed her neck. Not rushed, not nervous, not even careful. He didn't expect to be caught, because in his world, he never was. The door to penthouse 4B opened. They disappeared inside. It closed behind them, and the room exploded in silence. No words, no breath. Just a collective freeze. The kind that takes hold when power has no excuse left. Then breaking the stillness like a dropped glass. "That's not Melania." The voice came from one of the senior members on the committee. It wasn't loud, but it cracked something open. All eyes turned to Trump. For a brief moment, he held still, stone-faced. But his eyes darted too quickly. His nostrils flared. Something flickered under the surface. Then it snapped. "That's not me," he said, voice sharp, almost barking. "This is fake. Probably AI. Deep fake garbage. Anyone can create this crap now." He scoffed, tried to chuckle, but it fell flat in the dead air. No one joined him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't need to raise her voice. She simply stepped forward and said, "This footage was pulled from the hotel's internal system. It's not edited, it's time-stamped." She paused, locked eyes with Trump. And the suite they entered, Penthouse 4B, was registered under the name T. Whitaker. The name hit like a sudden drop in pressure. A low hum passed through the room, recognition setting in. Jasmine turned toward the monitor again. With a single keystroke, she brought up a second screen. A lease agreement appeared, clean, legal, impossible to deny. Tenant, T. Whitaker. Dates, October 10 to 14. Payment, $22,000. Source, Ameripatriot PAC, Trump's Super PAC, Trump's ghost name, Trump's moment at 4:07 a.m., now burned into public record. Jasmine let the silence land. Then she spoke the final blow, measured and fatal. "You didn't just misuse money, you used the system to bury her." Trump said nothing, because for the first time in that room, in that moment, he had nothing left to say. The truth wasn't done. Not yet. What they'd just seen was a kiss behind a door. But what Jasmine was about to reveal was what that door had been hiding. And it wasn't just an affair. It was a woman, a name, a disappearance. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She tapped her tablet again, and the next image filled the screen. A full-color photo taken from a street camera just outside the Washington View Hotel. The timestamp read, October 12th, 2016, 6:21 a.m. The woman in the red dress was walking away from the building, coat wrapped tight, her heels clicking unevenly against the sidewalk. Her hair was slightly tangled, her makeup smeared, her body curled inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. But what she carried said otherwise, a white envelope bulging with something thick, held tightly against her chest like a shield. In her other hand, a phone. She never looked up. Jasmine's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. "The woman in the video is Monica Leeds. She was a data analyst in Mr. Trump's 2016 campaign." Gasps didn't come this time. Just a wall of cold silence, the kind that sets in when people realize they remember that name. Monica had been mentioned in 3 email threads, 5 press releases, and 2 campaign memos, and then never again. She'd simply vanished. Jasmine stepped closer to the screen. She was assigned to work late on October 11th, updating precinct-level targeting data. She left headquarters after 11 p.m. No one saw her again inside the campaign. No resignation, no explanation. Her login credentials were disabled 3 days later. The screen changed again, this time to a scanned lease agreement, a legal document with a clean signature at the bottom. Tenant, T. Whitaker. The suite, Penthouse 4B. The total, $22,000 for 4 nights. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This lease was signed the day before Monica disappeared. The suite was already prepared when they arrived. The next slide appeared bank documents showing the transaction. A wire transfer initiated by Ameripatriot PAC, Trump's largest financial arm in 2016. The money trail was crystal clear. The Passys funds had gone directly into that penthouse. No third party, no buffer. Just politics turned personal. Another click, another image. It was Monica again this time, caught by the hotel's lobby camera. Her hair disheveled, her coat hanging open. She was walking alone, her steps uneven, and in her hand, that same white envelope. As the frame froze, Jasmine let it linger. Then a member of the committee, visibly shaken, leaned in and asked quietly, "Did she ever file a complaint?" Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes stayed on the screen, then slowly turned back to the room. "No," she said, "but she sent a message right before she disappeared." Her words fell like a slow-motion gavel. Not loud, but final. Because in that moment, no one was thinking about politics. They were thinking about Monica and what she had almost said. And then came the message Monica didn't send to the press. She sent it to the man who knew exactly how to make her disappear. Jasmine's hand moved slowly, deliberately, like someone lowering the blade after already drawing blood. She tapped the screen again. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as a new digital window appeared, simple, raw, and unmistakably real. At the top corner of the screen, a chat log. The names made a few members audibly shift in their chairs. Monica Leeds, Michael Cohen. Below them, the words that changed everything. Monica, He said it needs to be quiet. No media, no trail, no Jasmine Crockett. Cohen. Jasmine's not in Congress yet. Relax. Once it's handled, you vanish. The room froze. Not a single breath was heard. The weight of it sank in fast. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't media spin. It was a conversation that was never meant to surface. It wasn't about legal strategy. It was about erasure. Jasmine's voice came, low and sharp. This message was extracted from a device subpoenaed in a separate investigation. Metadata confirms the conversation occurred 36 hours after Monica exited the penthouse, she paused, and just 12 hours before she disappeared from the campaign. Her eyes never left Trump. Before anyone could recover, she pressed again. Another window opened. A second exchange. This time between Cohen and Hope Hicks, Trump's longtime communications aide. The tone was colder, businesslike. Done. Cohen. Monica is fine. Money sent. Suite cleared. Trump wants all CCTV wiped. The last sentence hit like an airless punch to the chest. Jasmine didn't explain. She didn't need to. The room understood what it meant. Erase the footage. Scrub the evidence. Pay her to disappear. All of it spelled out in plain language, in their own words. Trump didn't last a second longer. He launched to his feet, knocking his chair so hard it scraped back against the marble floor and hit the paneled wall with a deep, echoing thud. His voice exploded into the chamber. That's fake! I never said that! This is all fabricated garbage. These messages don't prove anything. His face turned crimson. His hands were trembling now, not from age, not from confusion, but from rage barely held together. His mouth twisted, searching for something to destroy. The chair immediately raised his gavel. Mr. Trump, you will sit down now. But the words barely landed before Trump swung around and stabbed a finger across the room, directly at Jasmine. You're a venomous snake. You are tearing this country apart. The chamber descended into chaos. Papers rustled. Staffers scrambled. One aide reached for a security call. Half the committee members started speaking at once, voices overlapping, authority splintering. Jasmine stood motionless, calm, unflinching, but around her, the temperature spiked. In just 30 seconds, a sealed congressional hearing had turned into a political riot. One member finally stood, slamming their palm on the table hard enough to silence the room. Enough! Suspend the hearing immediately! But even as the gavel banged again, no one would forget what they had just seen, or who had just tried to make it disappear. But the footage was only the surface. The real devastation came later when the cameras stopped rolling, when the hallway lights dimmed, and when one woman paid the price for being the secret. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She just opened a second folder thicker, heavier than the first, and held it with both hands. Her eyes weren't on Trump anymore. They were on the committee, the room, the stillness. There was no outrage in her expression now, no fire, just gravity. This part, she said quietly, is harder to show, but it has to be said. She placed a single document on the table in front of her and tapped her tablet. The large monitor flickered again, revealing a scanned medical report. At the top, George Washington University Hospital. Just beneath, patient Monica Leeds. Date of admission, October 31st, 2016. The text below was clinical, but Jasmine didn't let it sit in silence. 3 weeks after the night Monica Leeds entered that penthouse, she said, her voice now softened but razor-sharp. She was admitted to GW Hospital with internal bleeding, dizziness, and abdominal trauma. She was 10 weeks pregnant. Her words slowed. She miscarried within hours of admission. The weight of the statement hit the room like a blow to the chest. No one flinched, but you could feel the air pull inward, as if the room itself had gasped. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize it. She let the facts break the silence on their own. The miscarriage was confirmed in hospital records. Tissue was preserved as part of standard medical procedure. The DNA was entered into hospital archives under anonymized patient codes. She tapped again. The screen split side by side on one side, the hospital report. On the other, a redacted document labeled Presidential Medical Screening, 2018, Full Genetic Profile, Donald J. Trump. A single line highlighted in blue showed the statistical match. Jasmine read it aloud without pause. Result of comparative analysis. 92% probability of biological paternity. That number didn't echo. It rang. Hard. Heavy. It didn't need context. It didn't need reaction. It was the reaction. A ripple of movement passed across the room, not dramatic, but human. A chair shifted. A throat cleared. Someone blinked too many times. But no one said a word. Jasmine let the number hang in the room. Let it settle not just in the air, but in the conscience of every person seated at that table. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a phone older, scratched, screen slightly cracked. She held it in her hand for just a moment longer than usual, then tapped the screen and let the speaker play. The voice was faint, distant, but real. Real in the way that shakes something inside you. It was Monica, her tone slow, her breath uneven, like she had recorded it while pacing the floor of a small room, alone. He promised he'd help me if I kept quiet, but I lost more than he ever gave me. It was a single sentence, and it landed harder than anything said so far. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even broken. It was hollow, like something had already been taken, and nothing was coming back. Jasmine tapped again, and the audio stopped. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel clinical. It felt like a funeral. Jasmine stood still, phone in one hand, the other holding a sealed envelope. This, she said, raising the envelope slightly, is her official refusal to appear before this committee. She unfolded the page inside and laid it gently on the table. Her eyes didn't waver. Her voice didn't shake. She gave only one sentence to explain why. She lifted the document and read, "I don't want to see the man who cost me my child." That was the moment the silence broke. It wasn't a sound of outrage. It wasn't even a voice. It was the sound of pain, the quiet kind. One of the senior congresswomen sitting 3 seats down dropped her pen. Her hand went to her mouth. She tried to hide it, but a single sob slipped out small, involuntary. Her shoulders tensed, then slumped. A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. No one told her to be strong. Everyone understood. Everyone felt it. Across the room, Trump hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on Jasmine, not with shock, not with remorse, with fury, like a man cornered by something he couldn't mock, couldn't bribe, couldn't sue into silence. And then, like a grenade without a pin, he exploded. He surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward into the paneled wall with a dull, violent thud. His voice thundered through the room like a weapon. "You don't have the right to say that," he screamed. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy you on live television." His face was red, pulsing. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might shatter. The papers on the table shook from the weight of his shout, but Jasmine didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at him, calm and composed, as if she had already prepared for this moment 10 years ago. The committee didn't respond to him, not immediately, because Trump wasn't the loudest thing in the room anymore. That voice still lingered. I lost more than he ever gave me. It was still there, echoing between the marble walls and the paneled ceilings, not as sound but as presence. The presence of something gone, and the silence it left behind. The silence of someone who never got to speak under oath. The silence of someone whose truth was finally being said for her. Not by her. And for the first time that day, Donald Trump wasn't the center of the story. He was just the shadow behind it. But Jasmine wasn't finished because the one voice they hadn't heard yet was his. And once it played, nothing in that room would ever sound the same again. She reached into her folder and took out a small black speaker. No theatrics, no setup. Just one cold, calculated motion. She placed the device flat on the table. Every eye in the chamber followed her hand as if it were holding a detonator. And maybe it was. She didn't say a word, just pressed play. A soft static crackled, followed by silence, too much silence. Then a voice emerged, calm, controlled, confident. "She's not Melania, but she's quiet. That's all I need right now." The room didn't just react, it shifted. The words weren't shouted, weren't whispered. They were owned. That voice didn't belong to someone afraid. It belonged to someone used to getting away with it. Chairs stiffened, Pens froze midair. Even the HVAC hum seemed to fall still. There was no doubt who it was. The tone, the cadence, the smug ease behind every syllable. Jasmine didn't have to explain. No commentary, no breakdown. The silence carried more judgment than any prosecutor ever could. Then the second sentence came, and it ripped the floor out from under everyone. Just get rid of the footage. I'll throw another 20 grand at the PACs, no one will know. You could feel it, a drop in air pressure. The weight of a sentence no one could unhear. It didn't matter how many statements, denials, or spin cycles had come before. These were the words of a man who believed everything was a transaction, including people. Jasmine didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just stared at Trump. A forensic expert from the side of the room stood up abruptly, face pale but steady. The voice sample, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, matches the subject's known vocal profile at 88% confidence. The air snapped. Trump slammed both fists against the table with a violent crack, rattling glasses, papers, and nerves. His chair crashed to the floor behind him as he shot up like a bomb detonating in a confined space. "This is illegal," he roared, voice shaking with pure, uncontrolled rage. "You all are traitors." His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw locked so tight his words scraped out like gravel. He wasn't shouting to argue anymore, he was shouting to drown out the truth. He spun in place, looking for anyone, anything to unleash on. The gavel slammed down once, hard. "Mr. Trump, regain control of yourself or leave this hearing immediately." But Trump didn't hear it, or didn't care. He pointed straight across the table, veins bulging in his neck as he bellowed at Jasmine with the rage of a man losing his grip on reality. "You're a venomous snake. You are tearing this country apart." Two security officers moved fast from the rear. No words exchanged, no signal given. They stepped beside him, calmly but firmly, ready to act. His arms flailed for a second, not in resistance, just in chaos. But he didn't run. He didn't strike. He stood there, consumed by his own unraveling. And Jasmine, she didn't blink. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look surprised. She just stood with her hands calmly on the table, eyes locked on the man across from her who had once owned entire news cycles and now couldn't control a single moment in a sealed room. And then she spoke. Quiet, steady, final. "You taught people how to hide everything," she said, "but you forgot one thing a woman never forgets, especially the one who lost her child." The silence that followed was deeper than any shout he had managed, because for all his noise, all his fury, and all his threats, those words pierced through everything. They didn't just shut him down, they ended the performance. And in that chamber, for the first time in a very long time, the loudest man in the room had nothing left to say. And just like that, the most powerful man in the room wasn't yelling anymore. He was being escorted out of it. The doors hadn't even closed yet, and Trump's voice still bled into the chamber like smoke under a locked door. "This is a setup, a damn ambush. You people are done, do you hear me?" He twisted halfway back to scream one last time, but the security officers didn't stop. They didn't argue. They just kept walking. It wasn't forceful, but it was decisive. This wasn't a negotiation. This was containment. The moment the heavy doors shut behind him with a hollow, echoing thud, a second kind of silence settled into the room. Not shock, not tension. Collapse. Everything that had been crackling like electricity seconds before gone. The room didn't just fall quiet, it sank, slowly, deeply, like a city after the bomb. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the faint wheeze of the ventilation unit, the soft shifting of someone's shoe against the marble, and still no one spoke. Not the chair, not the aides, not even the tech assistant in the back, whose hand hovered over the audio console like it might break if touched too soon. The air was still charged, but it had nowhere to go. It just sat there, heavy and unmoving, like grief. At the far end of the table, someone finally broke the silence, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the kind of tone you only use when you've witnessed something so massive, it makes you whisper out of instinct. "We just witnessed a historic collapse," the congressman said. His voice was flat, no triumph, no malice, just awe. a slow exhale after holding in breath too long. No one answered him, because they all knew he was right, not just about Trump, but about everything. The illusion, the power, the untouchable myth. It had all cracked wide open right there on government record. The chair leaned forward slowly, as if his spine had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. He rubbed the base of his nose, then cleared his throat soft but deliberate. I'm ordering that the transcript of today's hearing be sealed under Section 9B until further review, he said, looking down at his own notes. A select internal subcommittee will be formed for independent review of the evidence submitted. No further testimony will be accepted until the committee has reconvened. His gavel didn't slam this time. It just touched the table. A single sound, enough to mark the shift without shattering the room. His eyes didn't rise. He wasn't making a statement. He was making an ending. And through all of it, Jasmine Crockett didn't say a word. She sat still for a long moment, her fingers resting lightly atop the folder that had just unraveled an empire. She didn't speak. She didn't gloat. She didn't even breathe heavy. She just sat there still, composed, precise. The kind of stillness that comes after war, when the weapons are down but the truth is still bleeding. Finally, she reached for her papers. One sheet at a time. No rush. No performance. She aligned them perfectly before tucking them back into her file. The folder closed with a soft snap, and with it, she closed the part of herself that had carried this weight in silence for too long. She stood. No announcement. No words to mark the moment. No victory speech. She just stood like someone who had survived something the world still didn't fully understand. And in that silence, her presence said everything her mouth didn't need to. Then from the far side of the room, a woman rose from her chair. She was older, mid-70s, maybe more. Her silver hair was pinned tightly back, her expression unreadable. The kind of woman who had seen too much to be impressed by spectacle. She didn't move fast, but she moved with purpose. She walked straight toward Jasmine, eyes locked, until she was standing just inches away. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. She placed one gentle hand on Jasmine's shoulder, fingers light, like she didn't want to weigh her down any more than the morning already had. And then she whispered, quiet, clear, and piercing, "You just did what no one else ever had the courage to do." Jasmine didn't respond, not because she didn't hear it, but because anything she said would have weakened it. And in that moment, nothing needed to be added. There were no cameras in the room, no headlines yet, no pundits spinning the story into the noise of politics. Just people, just silence, just a woman who came in alone, with nothing but a folder and a name, and left having said what the entire country had refused to hear. The chamber didn't move, no one packed up. No one filled the silence with excuses or analysis. They just let it linger. Because something had shifted, irreversibly, and deep down they all knew it. Today hadn't been about scandal, or spectacle, or headlines. It had been about consequence. And no one in that room, not one of them, would walk out the same. But silence wasn't the end. It was just the doorway to something even darker, the money. By now the hearing room felt colder, heavier, as if the oxygen itself had become weighted by everything that had just unfolded. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. She took a breath, then opened a final folder, slimmer than the others, but marked with a single red stripe. She placed it in front of her with quiet finality, and as she lifted her eyes, the screen behind her flickered back to life. No faces this time. No hallway cameras. No DNA reports. Just numbers. Columns of them. "Let's talk about the money," Jasmine said, her voice low but cutting. "Because this story doesn't just live in the shadows. It lives in the spreadsheets." The screen displayed a header in bold, Ameripatriot Political Action Committee, Internal Disbursement Summary. Beneath it, line after line of transactions, dates, amounts, recipients, routing numbers. At first glance, it looked routine, standard election cycle activity, but Jasmine knew better. She tapped her tablet, and 5 entries lit up in red. "These 5 payments," she said, zooming in, "were issued within a 30-day window, 1 week before Monica Leeds vanished from the campaign payroll, and 3 weeks after the penthouse suite was paid for in cash. The amounts were not small: $41,000, $38,600, $22,100, $29,900, and $39,600, adding up to a staggering total of $102. They weren't addressed to vendors or consultants. They weren't reimbursements or event expenses. They were wired to 3 Delaware-based LLCs, each with no website, no staff, and no listed business activity. Jasmine paused for a beat before speaking again. These companies, Cypress Ridge Holdings, Nashbrook Strategies, and Tanner Equity, all use the same registered agent, same office address, same mailbox, in fact. She tapped again. A Google Street View image filled the screen. A 2-room brick building next to a vape shop and a nail salon. There is no staff. There is no signage. There is no actual business. One of the members leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Jasmine anticipated the question before it came. We subpoenaed the bank records behind those LLCs, she continued. Each of them transferred the full balance within 48 hours to a single private account at First Keystone Bank in New York. That account is not under a business name. It belongs to an individual. She let that sit, not because she didn't know the name, but because they already knew where it led. I won't say who owns the account, she added carefully. Not here, not yet. That's for the subcommittee. But her eyes drifted, just for a second, toward the empty chair Trump had once occupied. The room grew colder. Again, Jasmine resumed. There were no invoices attached to these payments, no contracts, no line items. When we requested clarification from Ameripatriot, their legal team cited discretionary strategic disbursements, a category used when details are intentionally shielded under attorney-client privilege. She took a step forward, the screen behind her now displaying a side-by-side breakdown of campaign funding versus unexplained PAC withdrawals. Now let's be clear, political action committees are legally allowed to make strategic payments, but those payments are required by law to be documented, justified, and transparent. These weren't. These funds didn't go toward ads, or ground game, or voter outreach. She turned back toward the committee, her voice sharpening like a blade being unsheathed. These payments weren't political, they were protective. No one said a word. No one moved. Even the chair, who had stayed composed through the chaos of Trump's explosion, was now watching Jasmine with narrowed focus, like a man realizing he hadn't been told the worst of it yet. Here's the pattern, Jasmine continued. 1. A penthouse is rented under a false name. 2. A staffer goes missing from the campaign without explanation. 3. A series of large payments is routed through corporate shells. 4. The recipient of those funds cannot be named, invoiced, or justified. She tapped again. The words "no purpose disclosed" flashed in red beside each transaction. Then she asked the question, slowly, quietly, but with so much weight it cracked the marble silence. Are we funding campaigns, or are we paying for what happens behind closed doors? It didn't echo. It landed, final, brutal, unanswerable. A few members shifted. One looked down at his pen like it might offer a distraction. Another leaned back, arms folded, eyes glassy. No one spoke. Because how do you respond when the money, the purest, coldest proof of intention, has already made its statement? Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't press. She just stood there, letting the document speak louder than emotion ever could. She tapped her final slide. A pie chart appeared, simple, color-coded, devastating. It showed the percentage of Ameripatriot funds spent on actual campaign strategy versus undocumented disbursements. 41%. 41% of the money raised in the name of patriotism, platform, and party gone into shadows. Misdirected, masked, weaponized. She turned from the screen and faced the room, her voice dropping into something lower. Not for drama, for truth. We've spent years asking how power protects itself. We've spent decades asking why women disappear from systems run by men who never answer questions. The answer isn't in the speeches. It's in the numbers. She paused, then drove the knife in quietly. It's in the money. No one interrupted her. No one objected. Because you can argue with people, but you can't argue with math. On that screen, the equation wasn't just numbers, it was a truth. When power combines with access and strips away transparency, what's left is silence. And silence had never looked so expensive. But even as the air began to settle, The damage had already started to spread because what collapsed in that room wasn't just one man. It was belief. Trump was gone, but his shadow hadn't left. His empty seat at the far end of the hearing table seemed to stretch longer than it should have, as if the absence itself now carried weight. The silence hadn't lifted. It had only changed shape, because now it wasn't the silence of shock, it was the silence of calculation. Self-preservation had entered the room. The Republican side of the committee began to fracture quietly at first, then unmistakably. A senator who had just days earlier defended Trump's unorthodox style now kept his arms folded and his gaze fixed firmly on the grain of the table. Another, once a loyal media surrogate, whispered to his aide with the kind of urgency that only comes when someone's political instincts start screaming. The room no longer had two sides, it had two types of people, those retreating from the wreckage, and those too stunned to move. One congressman shifted in his chair and adjusted his tie, eyes scanning the room for someone to follow, but finding no one. A woman 3 seats down, a moderate from Ohio, closed her notebook without comment and stared straight ahead. No crosstalk, no strategizing, just quiet withdrawal. What had been unspeakable an hour ago was now undeniable, and they all knew it. Across the aisle, members of the independent and ethics committees were already exchanging looks subtle, surgical. One leaned toward the chair and slid forward a single sheet of paper, folded and unsigned. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't have to be. Jasmine watched it happen, eyes narrowed, but said nothing. The chair opened the note, read it slowly, and gave a single nod. No vote was called. No debate was needed. A formal request for a nationwide ethics investigation had just been placed on record. It would start with Trump, but it would not end there. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The motion was not hers to make, but it had been hers to awaken. At the edge of the room, aides moved in coordinated silence, whispering back and forth, glancing at digital briefings. You could almost see the headlines forming in real time behind their eyes. The fallout was already beginning, and none of them wanted to be the one caught standing too close to the epicenter. The chair, older than most in the room and far more weathered, adjusted his glasses and looked out across the chamber. His voice, when it came, was clear, deliberate, no longer reactive. "This hearing will reconvene in 72 hours, he announced loud enough for the transcriber to catch every syllable. "We are preparing for the possibility of a full public release." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a threshold. No one spoke. No one protested. Even those still loyal to the previous administration didn't raise a single hand in objection, because deep down they understood something unspoken but absolute. The floor had shifted, and you don't argue with a fault line. Jasmine stood still, her hands gently resting on her folder once more. She didn't react to the announcement, didn't flinch. Her gaze remained focused on the far wall, but her ears were tuned to the small sounds of power being recalculated. Shoes shuffling, chairs straightening, strategy unraveling. The whisper network had started. She could hear it barely, but it was there. A senator muttering to their aide, "If this goes public, we need to flip our position before the next cycle." Someone else, "This is going to bury us in swing states." And then barely audible, "Pull our name off the joint statement, now." The unraveling wasn't explosive, it was surgical. Political survival rarely makes noise. It just moves quickly. And that's exactly what was happening. They weren't protecting Trump anymore. They were protecting themselves. Even the networks outside the building hadn't caught up yet. The press still thought this was about a scandal. But inside the chamber, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about sex or money or campaign violations anymore. This was about who survives the reckoning. The chair leaned back in his seat, weary but not weak. He understood what had just happened. The hearing had started as one woman against a machine. It had ended with the machine splitting in half. Now came the part where pieces would be hidden, denials rehearsed, and stories rewritten in real time. But no matter how they spun it, the fracture had already happened. Jasmine glanced to her left and noticed one of the Republican members, someone who had openly mocked her in a previous session, now avoiding her eyes entirely. He wasn't just silent. He looked afraid, not of her, but of what she had just proven, that silence can be shattered, that power can be cross-examined, That no one is above the evidence. The energy in the room was no longer angry. It was uncertain, heavy with fear, heavy with consequence, and the countdown had begun. 72 hours. That's all they had. Before the walls they'd spent years building started talking. The air inside the chamber was heavy more than silence, more than stillness. It was the kind of air that pressed down on your ribs and made you aware of your own heartbeat. The walls, once sterile and indifferent, now seemed to echo with everything that had just been said, shown, and screamed. The empty chair Trump had left behind still rocked faintly, a quiet metronome ticking against history. For once, there was no noise, only the sound of reckoning. People didn't shift in their seats. No side glances, no whispers. Just the haunted stare of men and women who had just witnessed something they weren't prepared for and could never unsee. Jasmine remained seated at first, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of her folder. She wasn't flipping pages anymore. She wasn't looking for evidence. She was holding space for Monica, for the unnamed, for the women who had never been allowed to enter a room like this one, for those who had and left broken. There was no gavel, no announcement, just the kind of long pause that makes you realize the gravity of silence. Jasmine stood slowly, not because she was weak, but because this moment required precision. Her body, though tired, didn't show an ounce of retreat. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. Her eyes scanned the room one last time, not to challenge, but to testify. And then she spoke. "This isn't about Mr. Trump anymore," Jasmine said, her voice neither loud nor soft, but something deeper, something final. "This is about every woman who was ever forced into silence, every woman who was erased from history before she could write her name in it." A few breaths hitched. A staffer's pen clattered to the floor, and no one reached to pick it up. One congressman stared into his lap, jaw clenched, unmoving. But Jasmine wasn't looking at them. She wasn't speaking to them. Her words weren't bound to a committee. They were bound to something older than policy and deeper than partisanship. Jasmine turned her head slowly toward the surveillance camera, mounted in the corner of the chamber, the one that hadn't blinked once in hours. She locked eyes with the little black lens. The only witness whose silence wasn't a choice. "We are not going to let anyone disappear quietly ever again," she said. The words hung like steel in the air, unchallengeable, undeniable, unmoved. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a verdict. And not for Trump, but for the system, for the centuries, for every room like this one where silence had once won. That one line shifted something in the room more than any document or video ever had. Because facts could be debated, signatures could be disputed, voices could be questioned. But this was a declaration, a breaking of a cycle, a moment that would carve itself into the foundation of the institution she was standing in. One woman seated in the far left corner, senior, gray-haired, known for rarely displaying emotion, took off her glasses, slowly, methodically. She wiped the fog from the lenses but didn't put them back on. She didn't need to. She was already seeing clearer than she had in years. Jasmine didn't linger. Her job wasn't to savor applause, there wasn't any, and she didn't need it. Her job wasn't to gloat because none of this was triumph. It was mourning made public. It was justice stretched across wounds that had never healed. She gathered her folder, pages now neatly aligned. The edges were slightly bent from the pressure she'd applied earlier, from the anger she had to clench just to stay steady. But the final close of the cover made a sound more powerful than any gavel. It was the soft, deliberate click of control reclaimed. She began to walk toward the chamber doors. Her heels didn't echo, but her presence did. Not one member of the committee interrupted her. Not one person called her name. They had nothing left to say, and everything to remember. As she passed the row of seats where earlier some had smirked, shifted, whispered, those same individuals now looked down at their notes, as if afraid their own hands might be writing history in ink they couldn't erase. When she reached the exit, a hand gently touched her shoulder. It was an older woman, mid-70s, wearing a simple navy suit, no nameplate, possibly retired staff, possibly a long-standing congressional aide. She had remained quiet the entire hearing, but her voice was steady as she leaned in and said, "You just did what no one's ever dared." Jasmine didn't respond with words. She nodded once, deeply, And that single gesture said more than any speech ever could. Behind her, the chair finally stood. He cleared his throat, though it was barely audible. The microphone picked it up anyway. "Let the record reflect," he said, his voice raw with something between fatigue and reverence, "that the final statements have been entered. We stand in recess until further notice." He did not bang the gavel. He didn't need to. The sound of history shifting was louder than any wood on wood could ever be. And Jasmine? She stepped into the hallway alone. But not really. Because in that moment, she wasn't just one woman walking out of a congressional chamber. She was every woman who had been locked out, shut up, written off. She was carrying every voice that had been stolen and returning it. Outside, the building continued like nothing had changed, but everything had. And somewhere, someone watching would remember this, not as the moment Trump yelled, or the moment the committee gasped, or the moment names were listed. They would remember it as the moment one woman looked at power, stared into its lens, and said, "No more." As the fluorescent lights in the Capitol chamber dimmed to their usual sterile glow, a different kind of brightness remained, one not cast by bulbs or screens, but by clarity, the kind that burns not the eyes but the conscience. Jasmine Crockett's final words still lingered in the air like the aftershock of a siren. Her voice hadn't been loud, it didn't need to be. It was steady, deliberate, cutting through layers of indifference and cynicism like a scalpel in the hands of someone who knows exactly where the wound is. And those wounds, hidden beneath years of silence, behind curtains of procedure and paperwork, had been torn open. For decades, the machinery of politics had operated under the illusion that what was sealed stayed buried. That women like Monica Leeds were just footnotes in powerful men's stories. That checks written from political action committees could whitewash any hallway, no matter how stained. That if no one dared say her name, she'd simply fade, her pain dissolving into the marble floor like so many others before her. But Jasmine had broken that illusion, not with a scandal, but with a principle, that truth deserves daylight, even if it burns. This is no longer about Mr. Trump. It's about every woman who was ever forced into silence, ever erased from history. Her voice did not tremble. It didn't plead. It declared. And in that declaration, something shifted in the room. You could see it in the posture of the aides who had once scribbled without looking up. You could feel it in the way even the most jaded staffers stopped mid-typing. Jasmine wasn't just confronting a former president. She was confronting an entire ecosystem of denial and infrastructure built on strategic forgetting. And for the first time, the system flinched. She turned to the surveillance camera mounted above the center of the room, a camera that had, until now, served only as a silent observer to centuries of political theater. But Jasmine looked into it like she was addressing history itself. Her voice was lower now, but iron solid. "This time we will not let anyone disappear into silence anymore." She wasn't just making a promise to Monica. She was making it to every woman whose story ended in a file folder marked inconclusive, to every whistleblower who ran out of breath before they were ever heard, to every intern, aide, volunteer, or assistant who left pieces of themselves behind in rooms that never remembered their names. What Jasmine delivered that day was not just testimony, it was reckoning. And here is the truth that sat beneath all the evidence, all the bank records, all the hidden microphones. This wasn't about politics, not really. It was about power, about the kind that doesn't need to shout because it knows who will be believed and who won't. It was about the unspoken contracts built not on paper, but on fear. That's why this moment mattered. Because Jasmine didn't just introduce evidence, she ruptured the comfort of complicity. She forced a nation to ask, when did we start accepting erasure as a policy tool? When did we normalize paying women to disappear? When did silence become a form of governance? There was no applause in that room when she finished. No dramatic music cue. Just a stillness so complete it was almost wholly the kind that follows real truth, not the manufactured kind. And in that stillness, something else was born. A new kind of accountability. Not the courtroom kind, the moral kind. The kind that shows up when you least expect it, in a grocery store aisle, at a campaign stop, or in a whispered conversation between two survivors. The kind that doesn't care about poll numbers or PR strategies. The kind that makes people look their daughters in the eye and realize, we failed you. But we don't have to keep failing. Because every moment we excuse the erasure of women like Monica is a moment we let the architecture of silence strengthen. Every time a man like Trump storms out and the world lets him, we teach our sons that power is louder than truth. Every time someone like Jasmine risks everything and we stay quiet, we betray not just her, but ourselves. So what now? Now we remember. We remember Monica not as a scandal, but as a person. We remember Jasmine not as an exception, but as a blueprint. We remember that the job of government is not to protect reputation, but to protect people. And most of all, we remember this. The silence that protects the powerful is not peace. It is fear, weaponized. The silence that lets men walk away without consequence is not order. It is absence. And the silence that follows a woman's cry is not justice. It is the echo of a country that looked the other way. But now the echo is breaking. Now the camera records more than just faces, it records accountability. Now the microphone amplifies more than just names, it amplifies memory. And now the silence, once used as a shield, has become the evidence itself. Because Jasmine Crockett did not come to destroy a man. She came to remind a nation what it means to listen. And once you've truly listened, you can never unhear. And as the echoes of that chamber faded, the real world, the one outside those sealed congressional walls, began to stir. For those who had watched from a distance, who had followed the whispers without ever daring to speak, what Jasmine Crockett said next wasn't just a statement, it was a challenge. It was a line in the sand. The hearing was never just about Trump. It was never just about Monica. It was about every woman whose silence was bought, buried, or broken by power. And now Jasmine turned from that podium, not as a politician, but as a voice that demanded to be reckoned with. This isn't just about him anymore, she said, locking eyes with the surveillance camera still recording the final minutes. This is about every woman who was told to be quiet, every truth that was erased from the record. We will not allow silence to win again. That moment split the air like a lightning bolt. It didn't matter if you were red or blue. In that sentence, you either stood on the side of courage or you stood in the shadows. The room didn't move, but hearts did. Some people watching wept without knowing why. Others clenched their fists, remembering their own silences. And outside those marble walls, on streets Jasmine would never see, women in janitor uniforms, nurses in break rooms, teachers at chalkboards, and survivors at shelters paused for just a moment because someone finally said what needed to be said. Not as a lawyer, not as a victim, but as a witness to the weight of silence. She hadn't asked for applause. She asked for awareness. And awareness, true, raw, uncomfortable awareness, is dangerous to those who benefit from silence. Jasmine's words weren't written for headlines. They were etched into memory. They pressed up against centuries of excuses and asked a single impossible question. Now that you've heard this, what will you do? That question wasn't rhetorical, it was an alarm bell. Because the truth doesn't just call, it demands. And in the days that followed, the hearing transcript spread like fire, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real, tangible, human. Women began writing their own stories in the margins of that testimony. Some shared them, others didn't. But all of them knew they weren't alone anymore. It's easy to look at a name like Donald Trump and think this was about one man. But it wasn't. It was about systems that fund, defend, and recycle abuse as if it were just another political inconvenience. It was about money that buys silence and power that rewards erasure. And Jasmine Crockett shattered that illusion, not with rage, but with relentless precision. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for the moment to be safe. She carved the moment with her bare hands and made history answer to her. And now we, the audience, the public, the people who often say someone should do something, are no longer bystanders. We are witnesses too. And with witness comes responsibility. So how do we carry this story beyond one courtroom, one USB, one name? First, we stop pretending that abuse only looks like bruises. Silence is abuse. Gaslighting is abuse. Coercion wrapped in campaign money is abuse. And when we recognize that truth, we stop asking women, why didn't you come forward sooner? And start asking systems, why did you protect him for so long? Second, we demand transparency in every space, be it a boardroom, a church, or a campaign headquarters. If money is moving, if power is consolidating, if names are being erased, then it's not politics, it's pathology. And third, we speak. We speak in courtrooms, on ballots, at dinner tables, in shelters, and in classrooms. Because silence is no longer an option. This isn't just about gender. It's about humanity. It's about ethics. It's about reminding a culture obsessed with spin and optics that real lives bleed beneath the headlines. Monica Leeds wasn't a prop. She was a person with data in her hand, hope in her chest, and trauma in her silence. And if we allow her story to be just a footnote in Trump's biography, then we have failed. Jasmine didn't let that happen, and we shouldn't either. Whether we are lawyers or laborers, students or senators, our job now is to remember then respond. And if you're asking, what can I do? I'm just one person. Then understand this. Jasmine was just one person too. And one voice, armed with truth, is louder than 1,000 microphones fueled by lies. You don't need a committee. You need conviction. Start small. Support survivors. Believe them. Share stories like this one, not for gossip, but for awakening. Push your local representatives to introduce legislation around ethical campaign finance and whistleblower protection. Ask your schools how they handle harassment. Challenge your companies to make reporting safe and consequences real. Because every system, big or small, mimics the silence of the powerful until someone breaks the pattern. We don't need more saviors. We need more witnesses who refuse to look away. That's what Jasmine became. Not a savior, not a spectacle, but a sustained act of resistance. And resistance isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, painful. It looks like rewatching the same footage 10 times to catch a name on a hotel registry. It sounds like a woman reading a friend's last voicemail before she disappeared. It feels like calling out your own party, knowing the backlash will be brutal. That's what Jasmine risked. Not just her reputation, but her peace. And so we ask, will we let her stand alone? Because if Jasmine stood there for all the women who couldn't speak then, who will stand for her now? If a man as powerful as Trump can still twist the narrative, still call truth a traitor, then silence is still very much in power. That means this isn't the end. This is the opening scene of a much longer, more important story. One that takes place not on C-SPAN or social media, but in the choices we make from this day forward. Every time we say, I don't want to get involved, the silence grows louder. Every time we dismiss a woman's story as too emotional or too political, the silence grows stronger. But every time we say, I believe you, a crack forms in the wall. And someday enough cracks will break it down. That is the call to action. That is the responsibility. Not to worship Jasmine, but to walk with her, to take what she exposed and make sure it never hides again. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits, in burned folders, in silent recordings, in women's eyes when they say I'm fine and mean I can't speak. And when that truth is finally spoken, it doesn't just haunt the powerful, it heals the forgotten. So take this moment. Don't scroll past it. Don't shake your head and move on. Let it haunt you. Let it heal you. Let it drive you. And above all, let it remind you that justice isn't just a verdict. It's a choice. One that begins the moment we stop whispering and start demanding no more silence. But truth alone is never enough, not in a world built on distraction. It must be carried, repeated, protected. And that burden doesn't rest on Jasmine Crockett's shoulders alone. It belongs to every person who ever said, that's wrong, and then chose to do something about it. Because if we don't build something from this moment, it will rot into memory. And that's what systems like this count on. They survive on our fatigue. They thrive when outrage fades into routine. But this time, we've seen too much. You can't unhear a woman saying, he made me disappear. You can't unsee a man screaming at the truth like it's betrayal. And you can't pretend that a $22,000 apartment rented by a phantom name is just coincidence. This isn't just about what was done behind a locked door. It's about what we let happen out in the open. Because that's the deeper wound. Not just the assault itself, but the applause that followed. The votes, the promotions, the silence in exchange for power. And now that silence is breaking. Not with rage, but with memory. People are remembering where they were when they saw that hearing, remembering a name they haven't spoken in years, remembering a conversation they should have had but didn't. This is not a story you watch and move past. This is a story you carry into every room you walk into. Because if injustice can wear a suit and sit in the White House, then justice needs to wear sneakers and walk the streets. The reckoning isn't about taking down one man. It's about never letting any man stand above accountability again. And that means laws must change. Campaign money must be traced. Non-disclosure agreements must be revisited. Whistleblowers must be protected like national treasures. Women's bodies must stop being treated as collateral in the games of men with microphones and PAC money. We cannot let this become another chapter that ends when the cameras turn off. And if you're wondering what difference you can make from your living room, from your job, from your quiet corner of the world, know this. Every cultural earthquake begins with someone refusing to laugh at the joke, refusing to look away from the footage, refusing to say, that's just politics. Culture is not changed by the powerful, it is changed by those who refuse to be numbed. So when the next Monica Leeds walks into a campaign office, she should not have to choose between ambition and safety. When the next Jasmine Crockett stands before a table of men twice her age, she should not have to raise her voice just to be heard. And when the next hearing takes place, may it not require a hidden microphone or a DNA sample to prove what everyone already suspects. May it only require our courage. This wasn't just a political moment, it was a human one. The kind that splits history into before and after. You don't need to be a senator to honor it. You just need to keep asking the question that Jasmine left burning in the air. Who gets erased and who gets protected? And more importantly, what are we willing to do about it? The time for whispering is over. Now we speak. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.